So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Travis Bembenek. Welcome to Confidently Wrong. I am the CEO and owner of Mexico News Daily. I'm here with my sometimes frequently wrong friend, George.
Confidently wrong in your opinion, Travis.
That's right.
Today we're going to talk first about the cancellation of the Mexico City airport and then sort of lead that into just airports and air travel in greater Mexico. You know, I wanted to talk about this airport because, Travis, me and you talked about this a lot when we were together in San Miguel, and people are always spouting out an opinion of the airport, and, either it should have been canceled 100% or, it was the biggest blunder in recent Mexican history.
Yeah.
And, me and you talked about it, and a lot of times the facts and the numbers that people are spewing are just completely wrong. So. Yeah. Let's quickly just break down the rough numbers and the timeline of that, and then we'll sort of discuss it some
Sounds
more.
Good.
So, in 2014, Peña Nieto was president, and his sort of pet project during the 6 years he was president was this Mexico City airport. And so he announced the airport in 2014. They started basically raising money and building in 2015, 2016. They got about $5 billion deep into the construction of the airport. And then that was when AMLO was the president-elect in 2018. And while Peña Nieto was still president, AMLO hadn't been, put in office yet. AMLO had what a lot of people call or are calling an illegal referendum or an illegal vote and he basically put it out to the Mexican citizens, the Mexican population, for them to all vote on whether the airport should be canceled. And the reason they did that is AMLO was convinced that there was so much corruption involved in the airport and illegal contracts and blah, blah, blah. So he just hated it. And running on that anti-corruption sort of platform, he wanted to just squash it. So they had the illegal legal referendum vote, and only less than 1% of the overall population, I think, came out and actually voted for it. And that less than 1%, 70% voted in favor to cancel the airport. So they ended up canceling the airport, or as soon as AMLO became president, they ended up canceling the airport. And remember, at that time, they had already invested in construction $5 billion. Estimates to finish the airport were around $8 billion. And then to cancel it, because all the bonds had been issued and the money raised and all that stuff, they estimated, those numbers vary widely, but they estimated roughly $8 or $9 billion to finish or to cancel the airport. So it basically would have been the same price to build it as it was to cancel it. And now they've canceled it, obviously, and the airport sits out there and is half built. So is that one of the biggest blunders of the federal government?
I think that's the question, right?
Or is it, in hindsight being 2020, is it a blessing that they did cancel the airport? So let's
good
talk
question,
about
good
that.
setup. I think that's really the question, right? Was this the missed opportunity of a lifetime for the residents of Mexico City and the country at large? Or will history look back on this as maybe a good thing, right? I think that's what we want to debate today. I think, you went through the numbers, obviously billions and billions and billions of dollars that could have been spent to improve the lives of residents of Mexico City were wasted with this project, ultimately just completely wasted. But besides the money, there was also this really big blow to the psyche of Mexico City's residents. This was a plan to build a world-class
Totally.
Airport, right? So you think of these airports being built in cities like Dubai and Qatar And that was really the ambition of building this, incredible hub airport that the entire country would be proud of, to have.
And Mexico City, let's be honest, Mexico City is basically the capital of Latin America, right?
Yeah.
So this airport, was being built to represent Mexico City as the capital of Latin America. You fly in and it's, like you said, like Qatar or some of these crazy airports all over the world.
The ambition was to have an awesome first impression, right, upon landing. The current airport, very old. You could compare it to maybe LaGuardia or something.
Great comparison.
It's in the city. The city's grown around it. There's no space. It's crowded. There's delays. It leaks. Everything you can imagine. I mean, there's bus stations in Mexico City now that are nicer than the airport. And so really, the business class, the elite, wealthy class that traveled was absolutely looking forward to this, new world-class airport being built still relatively close to the center city, right? So I think it's important to understand that sort of emotional component to what this brought to the country and to the city as well. And so, to your point, it was canceled, but AMLO didn't just say we don't need it. He said we need another airport, but we can build it much less expensively, right? So in one episode, we talked about how the Tulum airport was built under the AMLO administration. It was built exceptionally fast. It was something like 20 months from cutting down the first tree to having the airport completed. And AMLO's vision was, and you could be as cynical as you want about this, but the vision was we don't need this, this world-class, world award-winning architecture type airport. There's still so many needs that are far more basic for the average Mexico City person that whether it's water infrastructure or food or hospitals or healthcare, you name it, we don't need to be spending it on an airport. And so he proposed building an alternative airport that would serve the city.
Well, it was already, that airport was already existing. I mean, it was like a military base or something, right?
That's right. So it was existing infrastructure was a positive, right? It was an airport. It was a military airport. So that was a positive. He proposed a far scaled down design. So nothing fancy, wasn't going to win any design competitions or architecture awards. A functional, basic airport on an existing footprint that he could get up and running very quickly, in less than 2 years and for a fraction of the cost. The total cost of that airport, the estimates are around $4 billion.
So, and do you think that was a good solution? Was that the answer? Because I've flown into that airport, and I'll talk about my opinions on it in a second. But do you think that was the right call?
So let me explain it, or let me give you this perspective on it. So I have not flown in there. I've read a lot about it. I've driven past it. One of the big negatives, raps about it is really far away from the central city.
So it's really far. I've flown into it once, and I personally will never fly into it again. It's really far, and you also can't get an Uber because it's on like federal land or something. So therefore, because it was an old military base and it's on federal land, they don't let the Ubers into the airport.
You may have just had a bad experience, George, or maybe the Uber driver denied you and didn't want to pick you up.
No, there are no Ubers. That's fact. But the other thing is, then you have to rent a van, basically, because I'm traveling with my family. 2 kids, my wife, dog, cat, tons of bags, and we had to rent a van, and the van was 1,500 pesos to go from the airport to Condesa, where we have an apartment. And it took us in traffic an hour and 45 minutes.
Okay. Well, let me speak to that. You asked me if I think it was a mistake, right? So, again, I think if you just look at the George experience of flying into that airport, it sounds like it was a mistake, right? So maybe for you and your family, it's not a good answer, right? It's not a good solution. But Let's just step back a minute and say, let's remember when the Denver airport was first built, right? This new airport in Denver is not new anymore, but it was built, basically in Nebraska, right? And everybody thought, what is this? It's so far away from everything. There's no public transportation there. There's nothing out there. And over time, a train was built out there, more infrastructure was improved there, a city sprouted up around there. And it, in fact, now looking back on it, is considered a world-class airport. Another analogy I would give is I lived in the Chicago area for 13 years before I moved to Mexico. I flew out of the O'Hare Airport almost every single week for 13 years. I never once, not once, flew out of the Midway Airport. So nothing against it. I just had my airport that worked for me. It was closer to me. It was more convenient to me. So I think, and I guess one other U.S. type example is think of the New York City area. Newark, LaGuardia, Kennedy.
JFK.
You don't have to love all three of them. I bet if you ask most New York residents, they've got one that they like, and that's the one that works.
No, that's
for them.
interesting because I grew up in Connecticut and we always went to LaGuardia because it was the closest, right?
Right. Not because it was the nicest.
No, it was a shithole.
Exactly. So let's get back to Mexico City. So when that, one thing to remember in Mexico is oftentimes the infrastructure of private, public, local, state doesn't happen at the same speed, right? So this was one of the signature projects of AMLO, and he built that airport damn fast, right? So fast that, for example, there wasn't even a proper bus service to connect that airport to the transportation hubs of the city or areas where.
Well, now they have the train.
They didn't have bus, they didn't have a train. So
No, but they do now.
They do now, right. So again, maybe the George experience of getting there and no Uber, no train, no bus was a nightmare. But as time progresses, the city, the local government connected the bus infrastructure, connected the train infrastructure. And you got to remember, a city the size of Mexico City, 23 million people spread over hundreds of square miles. This airport doesn't have to work for you. That's okay, right? Because the other one does. And I think, now going back, is the other one as nice well, no, but it's convenient, it's close. And so I think that's
there's also plans, Travis, to do a huge renovation of the old existing Mexico City airport.
That's right. There's been, in the last few months, they've announced a couple $2 billion improvements for that airport. So I think, no one would say they love the New York City metropolitan airports, but at the end of the day, they work, right? They take care of a massive metropolitan area, different people in different areas of different economic classes. It works. And I think, looking at it more holistically, I think this is going to work for Mexico. Another thing you didn't bring up, and this is who knows what would have happened, but Mexico has had an exceptionally rainy season this year.
Yeah, I was going to bring this up, and we need to show a picture when we edit this of what happened to that airport.
Go ahead and explain it if you'd like.
Well, one of the reasons that they canceled it was because the geotechnical engineers were basically saying this is being built on like a lake bed and
Yes.
it's sinking, and they were putting in the runways and the runways were sinking and cracking and blah, blah, blah. So that was one of the big reasons. And, apparently there was some truth to that because like you were about to say, I think June was maybe the rainiest month either Mexico City's had in like 20 years or maybe ever. And they did aerial shots of the canceled airport site, and the lake had fully engulfed like the entire site. You can't even see anything. It just looks like the lake has come back. So, on that point, maybe hindsight is 2020. Maybe they were totally right. Had they built this brand new airport, maybe it would have been under 2 feet or 3 feet of water in June.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up and shared that detail, because a lot of the people, the business people or the elite in Mexico City, they don't talk about that, right? They all lament that there's not this world-class airport with amazing lounges and everything. But we have to remember, Mexico City used to be a lake, right? The entire city was a lake. And as more and more people moved in, more and more water was sucked out, the city sank, but it is ultimately on a lake bed. And so as the previous, as Peña Nieto was looking for a place to put an airport, Mexico City is surrounded by massive mountains. There's not many options.
Totally.
So the option he chose was the old lake bed of Lago Texcoco, which, Mexico has been drawing so much more water than the replenishment rate over years and years and years as the Mexico City population.
Then the aquifer dries up and the land sinks.
Yeah, but so the thinking was, this lake, it's never going to come back again. It's dry. It's fine. It's perfect to build runways. Well, lo and behold, you have a, once in 100-year type rain event as we've had this year or season. And as you said, it's underwater. The lake is refilling again. Now, it's not
those
like
those photos are amazing and very damning.
They are damning.
Out when I saw it.
And again, you could, this can get political to some extent, but AMLO's point as well was this is a lake and should have always been a lake. And so not only did he cancel the airport, but then he essentially turned the entire area into a massive park. So there's bike trails and soccer fields in the areas that aren't prone to flooding. And then it's recognizing that ultimately this is a massive floodplain that can hold water and ultimately allow for regeneration of the water table to Mexico City. So I think, trust me, I used to fly into Mexico City at least once a month. I would, as we're landing, I'd look down at that new airport being built, and I said, damn, I can't wait until that thing's built because I can't stand the current airport. Of course, I'd be lying if I didn't say there's a part of me that wouldn't love a world-class airport there. But I think just looking as what we've discussed in Mexico City, I think it's going to be okay. And it hasn't had an impact on people saying, well, I don't want to invest in Mexico City anymore. Mexico City as a tourist hub is more attractive than ever. So it's not like the current airport that we all know and don't really love isn't functional, right? It is a massive airport that receives 45 million people a year. It's just not, you're not going to stay there or show up 3 hours early to your flight.
I read some fact in some articles when I was prepping for this somewhere that if all of the flights flying into the main Mexico City airport are on time, that they can only handle 80% of the scheduled flights on any given day.
Which is different than O'Hare.
Yeah, I was going to say, which is probably very similar to other airports, but they're banking sort of on that. And, the other thing which is weird, given that statistic, is, and I fly to Mexico City all the time, probably, 15 times a year. I'm there a lot. And unless I'm flying late in the afternoon, my flights are pretty much always on time within an hour. Like a 40-minute delay isn't unheard of, but, that's not that bad.
And the government's been taking steps to improve the load on that airport. So they force all cargo flights, all freight flights to use this new airport, right? So that took some of the load off. The other thing is people said, well, no one's going to want to use this airport. No airline is going to want to use it. Just last week, one of the local airlines in Mexico announced new flights to Austin, Texas from that airport.
Who was that, Polaris or Viva? Who was that?
Viva Aerobus. So it's happening, right? I mean, it doesn't all happen, as fast as we want or at the same time, but flights are being added there. Infrastructure is being connected. The older airport is having some of its load taken off of it. So again, I look at it like the New York City airports. I mean, can you ever have a good situation when you have that many people using those facilities? You're just sort of managing a tough situation and doing the best you can, I think. And I think Mexico City is going to be fine on this at the end.
So that was a good sort of comment that made me think of something. So let's say the canceled airport wasn't sinking and the lake just didn't happen, right? But the lake did happen. So obviously hindsight's 2020. If that didn't happen, they finished it to the cost of the additional $8 billion, had some world-class airport. Do you not think that that would have been a great thing?
I think a great airport, of course, would be a great thing, but that's kind of a vague sentence, right? The question is, would it have a significantly different impact in the amount of people, vacationing in the area, business people, businesses investing in the area? And I would argue that actually, if you look at the data of the impact on the rest of the country and the airports in the rest of the country, this may ultimately be a positive.
And I want to talk about that because me and you talked about that a little bit offline, and you had some interesting comments for once. So tell me, expand on that a little bit.
So we all know Mexico City, 23 million people. It has just such an outsized impact financially, culturally, wealth, economically, that, as in many countries, there's really one major airport that you fly into in a country, right? Obviously, countries like the US being exceptions, but many second, third world nations around the world, there's really only one major airport where you fly into if you're flying in from another country. And of course, in Mexico's case, forever, that was Mexico City. If you lived in other parts of Mexico and you wanted to go anywhere, you essentially had to fly from your town to Mexico City and then from Mexico City out, right? That was the model. And so I think if you look at what's been happening the past few years as Mexico City's older airport has gotten to full capacity, what's happened in cities like Querétaro, León,
Puerto Vallarta,
Monterrey, airlines have been adding flights at an absolutely astonishing rate, right? So the amount of flights being added, direct flights from Canada, Canadian cities, US cities, directly to these second tier cities in Mexico, through the roof. I mean, it's just, we write an article almost every week about new direct flights being added.
Not only through the roof, but they're also improving or building new airports in most of those cities that you've mentioned. I mean,
Absolutely.
In Puerto Vallarta, you should see they're in the middle of construction right now, the whole new terminal, and it is massive. It's like twice the size of the old terminal.
That's what I mean. If you think, so just to finish the point, there's all these direct flights now throughout North America to these second tier cities in Mexico. I think that's a great thing for these second tier cities. I think it's a great thing to have more economic growth through these direct flights in those cities. There's also been flights added from these cities, Monterrey, Guadalajara, León, Querétaro, direct flights to Europe, direct flights to Asia from these cities.
Yeah, that's crazy.
A couple ladies in our office here in San Miguel, they're flying next week to Korea and they're going through Monterrey. So I think, on one hand, you have those second tier cities now getting direct flights.
Is second tier kind of a bad word? Can we come up with another
I don't
word
mean
for
it in a
second
bad
tier?
word. I mean, you've got Mexico City being the clear hub. Then you have that next tier of cities, Monterrey, Guadalajara, León, Querétaro, good examples. They are getting these direct flights. Business people want direct flights. People who do tourism, on vacation want direct flights. And so that's ultimately a benefit for all those cities. To your point, George, if you go through the airports, whether it's, Puerto Vallarta, Puerto Escondido, Cancun, Tulum, Los Cabos, they are all dramatically expanding. They are adding terminals, not just gates, they're adding terminals to accommodate more growth. Again, if you were a European and you wanted to go anywhere in Mexico, you had to fly to Mexico City and then take another flight. You've now got direct flight options. And then to take that even further, just in the last month or two, the government has approved 5 new airports to, and again, I don't mean this in a derogatory way, George, so don't get offended, but sort of tier 3 cities, right? Where, and I say tier
that sounds bad.
In terms of population, right? So the airport dynamic in Mexico is so alive and well. There's competition. The foreign airlines are adding flights here. The domestic airlines like Volaris and Viva Aerobus, Aeromexico are growing like crazy, adding flights like crazy. So I think, kind of to circle the conversation back a little bit, I lament the fact that your family had a bad experience flying into Mexico City's new airport. But I think if you sort of step back and look at what's happening in the country, it's awesome what's happening.
Okay, so do you think if they had finished the prized airport, Peña Nieto's pet project, if they had finished that, do you think that would have then taken away from what we have seen happen in cities like Monterrey, Querétaro, or do you think that would have happened anyway and we could have had an amazing new airport that floods?
Well, I mean, that no one really knows, right? But I think if you look at the data, it's no coincidence to me that over the past few years, basically every airport in the country outside of Mexico City has been exploding in terms of passenger growth, in terms of new flights, in terms of terminal and gate growth. So I don't know, maybe all of that would have happened and we would have had the benefit of the incredible new airport in Mexico City. But I just don't see that. I think people saw it as, when I say people, I mean airline operators and airlines, or airport operators and airlines. They realized it's time. It is time to not just have everything centralized in Mexico City and start building out the airport infrastructure of a second emerging to first world nation. Whereas, the past of just sort of one amazing airport in Mexico City and then everything else in the country looking like a glorified bus station, that's really not good for the country, in the long term. It might be for your family, again, maybe.
The funny thing is everyone talks about, AMLO's new airport, then the main Mexico City airport and the canceled airport, but nobody talks about the Toluca airport, which is actually closer for a lot of people that live in certain parts of the city than AMLO's new airport. I mean, it's only about an hour and 10 minutes from my house, but that's 30 plus minutes quicker than going to the new airport north of the city.
Toluca is just one of those airports. For some reason, it just stayed this sort of very local, multiple local flight kind of hubs, and it just didn't take off. I mean, it's different government, state government than the Mexico City government.
Yeah, it's Estado de Mexico.
A part of it, exactly. So, sometimes it's not totally understandable or logical why Toluca wouldn't have picked up, but it didn't, right? It's kind of been the same. It's got some flights to the beach areas and some of the big cities, but it's not a major growth airline hub at all.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I've only flown in there locally. I don't even know what flights they have on an international basis, but I like it because it's empty and it's convenient, exactly. And All right, so what
do you feel a little less wrong, George, about your initial take on things?
No, this is why I like chatting with you. You enlighten me for sure. I look at it, taking the information that you've given me, and I look at it in a slightly different light, but the big sort of variable or the big issue why I think canceling it was the right thing to do was not because of all the fantastic commentary you've given me, but mainly because of the flooding. And had they built it and it was under 2 feet of water, it would have looked beyond stupid. Like that's what everybody warned about.
The laughing stock of the world, right?
Yeah, that's what everybody was worried about. What some like whistleblower engineers were talking about. This is sinking, blah blah blah, and AMLO sort of caught wind about that, and that was a lot of controversy over the cancellation. And it ended up being true. And had they built it, yes, it would have been the laughing stock, and it would have been, black eye, super embarrassing. So that's the main reason I think
the most unfortunate thing in all of it is just that billions of dollars were wasted, right? I mean, Mexico has so many needs for money. and to see that happen. George, your audio's going on us, so I think it's a good time to wrap. I hope you've all learned something and just learn to not necessarily just accept what you hear in social media or hear, look beyond the headlines and just go deep. Spend the time reading, arming yourself with more information so that, as my friend George is here, you're not quite confidently wrong quite so often. So with that, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to talking again soon with you. Thanks, George, for your time today.
Thanks, Travis.